Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Geography of Nowhere, The Rise and Decline of America's Man-Made Landscape, by James Howard Kunstler, narrated by Al Kessel. Chapter 1. Scary Places. There is a marvelous moment in the hit movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit that sums up our present national predicament very nicely. The story is set in Los Angeles in 1947. The scene is a dreary warehouse, headquarters of the villain, Judge Doom, a cartoon character masquerading as a human being. The hallucinatory plot hinges on Judge Doom's evil scheme to sell off the city streetcar system and to create just such a futuristic car-crazed society as Americans actually live and work in today. "It's a construction plan of epic proportions," he intones. "They're calling it," portentous pause, "a freeway. 8 lanes of shimmering cement running from here to Pasadena. I see a place where people get on and off the freeway, off and on, all day and all night. I see a street of gas stations, inexpensive motels, restaurants that serve rapidly prepared food, tire salons, automobile dealerships, and wonderful, wonderful billboards as far as the eye can see. My God, it'll be beautiful." In short order, Judge Doom is unmasked for the non-human scoundrel he is, dissolved by a blast of caustic chemical, and flushed into the Los Angeles sewer system, while the rest of the cute little cartoon creatures hippity-hop happily into the artificial sunset. "That lame-brained freeway idea could only be cooked up by a tune," comments the movie's gumshoe hero, Eddie Valiant, afterward. The audience sadly knows better. In the real world, Judge Doom's vision has prevailed, and we are stuck with it. Yet the movie's central metaphor, that our civilization has been undone by an evil cartoon ethos, could not be more pertinent, for more and more we appear to be a nation of overfed clowns living in a hostile cartoon environment. 30 years ago, Lewis Mumford said of post-World War II development, "The end product is an encapsulated life, spent more and more either in a motor car or within the cabin of darkness before a television set." The whole wicked, sprawling megalopolitan mess, he gloomily predicted, would completely demoralize mankind and lead to nuclear holocaust. It hasn't come to that, but what Mumford deplored was just the beginning of a process that, instead of blowing up the world, has nearly wrecked the human habitat in America. Ever busy, ever building, ever in motion, ever throwing out the old for the new, we have hardly paused to think about what we are so busy building, and what we have thrown away. Meanwhile, the everyday landscape becomes more nightmarish and unmanageable each year. For many, the word development itself has become a dirty word. 80% of everything ever built in America has been built in the last 50 years, and most of it is depressing, brutal, ugly, unhealthy, and spiritually degrading. The jive plastic commuter tract home wastelands, the Potemkin Village shopping plazas with their vast parking lagoons, the Lego block hotel complexes, the gourmet mansardic junk food joints, the Orwellian office parks, featuring buildings sheathed in the same reflective glass as the sunglasses worn by chain gang guards, the particle board garden apartments rising up in every meadow and cornfield, the freeway loops around every big and little city with their clusters of discount merchandise marts, the whole destructive, wasteful, toxic, agoraphobia-inducing spectacle that politicians proudly call growth. The newspaper headlines may shout about global warming, extinctions of living species, the devastation of rainforests, and other worldwide catastrophes, but Americans evince a striking complacency when it comes to their everyday environment and the growing calamity that it represents. I had a hunch that many other people find their surroundings as distressing as I do my own. Yet I sensed, too, that they lack the vocabulary to understand what is wrong with the places they ought to know best. That is why I wrote this book. The sentimental view of anything is apt to be ridiculous, but I feel that I have been unusually sensitive to the issue of place since I was a little boy. Before I was old enough to vote, I had lived in a classic post-war suburb, in the nation's greatest city, and in several classic small towns, and along the way, I acquired strong impressions about each of these places. One September day in 1954, my father and mother and I drove 20 miles east out of New York City in our Studebaker on the Northern State Parkway to meet the movers at our new house in the country, as my mother would refer forever to any place where you cannot walk out your front door and hail a taxi. Until that time, Long Island had been one of the most beautiful places in the United States, and our house was one small reason it would not remain that way much longer. It was in a development called Northwood. The name had only a casual relation to geography. Indeed, it was north of many things: the Parkway, the land of Dixie, the Tropic of Capricorn. But the wood part was spurious, since the tract occupied a set of former farm fields, and among the spanking new houses not a tree stood over 10 feet tall or as thick around as my father's thumb. The houses, with a few exceptions, were identical boxy split levels, clad in asphalt shingles of various colors, with 2 windows above a gaping garage door, affording the facades an aspect of slack-jawed cretinism. Our house was an exception. The developers, I'm told, had started out with different models before they settled on the split levels, which were absolutely the latest thing and sold like hotcakes. Our house was a ranch clad in natural cedar shingles. It had a front porch too narrow to put furniture on, and shutters that didn't close or conform to the dimensions of the windows. It sported no other decorative elaborations beside an iron carriage lamp on the front lawn that was intended to evoke "Ye Old Post Road Days," or something like that. What it lacked in interior grandeur, it made up in comfort inside. The 3 bedrooms were ample. We had baths galore for a family of 3, a kitchen loaded with electric wonders, wall-to-wall carpeting throughout, and a real fireplace in the living room. The place cost about $25,000. Our quarter-acre lot lay at the edge of the development. Behind our treeless backyard stood what appeared to my 6-year-old eyes to be an endless forest, like the wilderness where Davy Crockett slew bears. In fact, it was the 480-acre estate of Clarence Hungerford Mackay, president and major stockholder of the Postal Telegraph Cable Company, the precursor of Western Union. Mackay was long gone by the 1950s, his heirs and assigns scattered to the winds, and Harbor Hill, as his property had been named, was in a sad state of abandonment and decay. It took me and my little friends some time to penetrate its glades and dells, for there was much news on the airwaves that fall about the exploits of George Metesky, New York City's mad bomber, and we had a notion that the old estate was his hideout. A lacework of gravel carriage drives, overgrown by dogwood and rhododendron, crisscrossed the property. At its heart stood the old mansion. I don't recall its style, shingle, Queen Anne, railroad Romanesque, but it was much larger than any Northwood house. Juvenile delinquents had lit fires inside, and not necessarily in the fireplaces. Yet for its shattered glass, musty odors, and bird droppings, the mansion projected tremendous charm and mystery. Even in ruin, it felt much more authentic than our own snug, carpeted homes, and I know we regarded it as sort of a sacred place, as palpably a place apart from our familiar world. We certainly spent a lot of time there. One week in the spring of 1956, the bulldozers appeared in the great woods behind our house. Soon, they had dug a storm sump the size of Lake Ronkonkoma back there, a big ochre gash surrounded by chain-link fencing. In the months that followed, the trees crashed down, the mansion was demolished, new houses went up, and Clarence Hungerford Mackay's 480 acres was turned into another development called, what else? Country Estates. A year later, my parents landed in divorce court, and I moved into Manhattan with my mother. On the whole, I did not like the city at first. My mother enrolled me in an organized after-school play group to keep me out of trouble. Our group made its headquarters in a little meadow near the Ramble in Central Park, where we played softball and kicked the can. Unlike the wilderness of Clarence Mackay's estate, the park seemed clustered with bothersome adults, strolling lovers, nannies pushing prams, winos, everyone but George Metesky. By and by, I made city friends. We played in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because it was a block away from my elementary school at 82nd and Madison. This was in the days before art became just another form of showbiz, and on weekday afternoons, the great halls of the Met were practically deserted. My other chief recreation was throwing objects off the terrace of a friend's 15th-story penthouse apartment. Snowballs, water balloons, cantaloupes, but the less said about this, the better. Summers, I was sent away to a boys' camp in New Hampshire, where I got my first glimpse of what real American towns were like. From age 12 up, we were trucked one night a week into the town of Lebanon, population 8,000, where we had the choice of attending a teen street dance or going to see a movie at the old opera house. There was a third, unofficial option, which was to just wander around town. Lebanon had a traditional New England layout. A 2-acre square occupied the center of town. Within it stood a bandshell and a great many towering elms. Around the square stood various civic buildings of agreeable scale, the library, the town hall, the opera house, whose dignified facades lent Lebanon an aura of stability and consequence. At the west end of the square lay a commercial district of narrow shop-lined streets wending downhill to a mill district. Here I bought fishing lures and the latest baseball magazines. Off the square's east end stood the town's best residential streets, lined with substantial-looking houses, mainly of 19th century vintage. They were set rather close together and lacked front lawns, but they seemed the better for that. Instead, the capacious porches nearly met the sidewalks. Big trees lined the streets, and their branches made a graceful canopy over it like the vaults inside a church. In the soft purple twilight, with the porch lamps glowing, and the sights and sounds of family life within, these quiet residential streets made quite an impression on me. I was charmed and amazed to discover that life could be physically arranged the way it was in Lebanon, New Hampshire. As I thought about it, I realized that a town like Lebanon was what a place like Northwood could only pretend to be. That Northwood, lacking any center, lacking any shops or public buildings, lacking places of work or of play, lacking anything except the treeless streets of nearly identical houses set on the useless front lawns, was in some essential way a mockery of what Lebanon really was. As a teenager, I visited my old suburban chums back on Long Island from time to time, and I did not envy their lot in life. By puberty, they had entered a kind of coma. There was so little for them to do in Northwood, and hardly any worthwhile destination reachable by bike or foot, for now all the surrounding territory was composed of similar one-dimensional housing developments, punctuated at intervals by equally boring shopping plazas. Since they had no public gathering places, teens congregated in furtive little holes, bedrooms and basements, to smoke pot and imitate the rock and roll bands who played on the radio. Otherwise, teen life there was reduced to waiting for that transforming moment of becoming a licensed driver. The state college I went off to in 1966 was located in a small town of 5,000 in remote western New York State. To a city kid, Brockport was deeply provincial, the kind of place where the best restaurants served red wine on the rocks. Yet, I enjoyed it hugely. At a time when small towns all over America were dying, little Brockport remained relatively robust. Its little Main Street had a full complement of shops, eating places, and, of course, drinking establishments, for this was back in the days when 18-year-olds could buy liquor. There was an old single-screen movie theater downtown with an Art Deco facade and a marquee edged in neon lights. The reason for the town's healthy condition was obvious: the college. It furnished jobs and a huge volume of customers for Main Street's businesses. It gave the place some intellectual life, totally absent in neighboring burgs where all the lesser institutions of culture had been replaced by television. The students enlivened the town by their sheer numbers. Many of them had come from boring one-dimensional suburbs like Northwood, and they appreciated what life in a real town had to offer. It was scaled to people, not cars. It had the variety that comes from a mixed-use community. Its amenities lay close at hand. It offered ready access to genuine countryside, mostly farms and apple orchards. We loved our off-campus apartments in the 19th century houses on tree-lined streets or above the shops in the business blocks downtown. We loved rubbing elbows on the streets, meeting friends as we walked or biked to class. We loved the peace and quiet of a small town at night. The campus itself, a miserable island of androidal modernistic brick boxes set in an ocean of parking, was quite secondary to the experience of life in the town. I suppose that my experiences in suburb, city, and town left me biased in favor of town life, at least insofar as what America had to offer in my time. That bias is probably apparent in the chapters ahead. But all places in America suffered terribly from the way we chose to arrange things in our post-war world. Cities, towns, and countryside were ravaged equally, as were the lesser orders of things within them: neighborhoods, buildings, streets, farms, and there is scant refuge from the disorders that ensued. The process of destruction that is the subject of this book is so poorly understood that there are few words to even describe it. Suburbia, sprawl, overdevelopment, conurbation, Mumford's term, megalopolis. A professor at Penn State dubbed it the galactic metropolis. It is where most American children grow up. It is where most economic activity takes place. Indeed, I will make the argument that this process of destruction, and the realm that it spawned, largely became our economy. Much of it occupies what was until recently rural land, destroying, incidentally, such age-old social arrangements as the distinction between city life and country life. To me, it is a landscape of scary places, the geography of nowhere that has simply ceased to be a credible human habitat. This book is an attempt to discover how and why it happened, and what we might do about it. Chapter 2: American Space. The settlement of the New World was a transforming event in human history. For Christian Europe, already burdened by its past, the New World was a vast stage upon which to act out, at the scale of nations, the romance of redemption, of a second chance at life. In the first 2 centuries of the settlement saga, this state of mind was as significant as the vast new supply of virgin land. The Puritan pilgrims who came to the wild coast of North America in 1620 must have wondered, from one moment to the next, whether they had landed in the Garden of Eden or on Monster Island. The biblical scripture that formed the bulk of their intellectual cargo was full of confusing notions. The wilderness of Hebrew folklore had been the abode of evil presided over by the archdemon Azazel. Yet the wilderness was also a place where the Hebrew prophets went to commune with God, to be tested by Him, and purify themselves. The Bible describes the Garden of Eden only sketchily, sidestepping many particulars. It was well-watered. It contained every tree that is pleasant to sight and good for food. The climate is not avouched. Regarding animal life, the text is vague. The beasts of the field and fowls of the air were present, but there is no mention of wolves, lions, bears, crocodiles, rats, tarantulas, and other less tractable creatures. One snake is reported. Man was put into the garden to dress it and to keep it, as a sort of custodian, one who works for a very tough landlord. The Garden of Eden was never a place to which Adam and Eve ever held any proprietary rights, and the first time they misbehaved, the landlord evicted them. America, in the minds of the earliest settlers, was therefore a place fraught with paradox. Viewed as a wilderness, it was possibly wicked, possibly holy. If it was the Garden of Eden, then it was a place to which sinful man really had no rightful claim. There was a third point of view consistent with Scripture. Like other persecuted people, the Puritans identified with the Israelites, with their sojourn in the wilderness and their arrival in the promised land of Canaan. This was finally the myth they embraced to understand themselves, though it took some strenuous intellectual stretching to pull together all these ideas. In 1607, a group of Puritans from Scrooby, a village not far from York, fled the Babylon of England for Holland. There, they were exploited in the cloth industry, as foreign workers are apt to be, while their children became Dutchified. After 10 years of this, they decided to make a fresh start in the wild country of America, with the hopes of establishing a profitable fishing and trading settlement in the Virginia Company's grant under English protection. It took them several more years to make the arrangements. The enterprise was eventually financed by Thomas Weston, a Puritan merchant of London. History is not clear as to who may have been using whom. As a practical matter, the Puritans needed financial backing to get to America, and the Virginia Company needed colonists to begin the commercial exploitation of the New World. Weston engaged 2 ships, the Speedwell and the Mayflower, and drew up terms for a joint stock venture which the Holland Group accepted. They soon quarreled with Weston over the details. He withdrew his support, but the fully provisioned ships sailed anyway. The Speedwell was abandoned in Devon as unseaworthy, and the Mayflower continued alone across the Atlantic with as many as it could hold. Once Cape Cod was sighted, a rash of impromptu changes were made in the plan. The Pilgrims understood from their navigational instruments that the region lay north of the Virginia Company's patent, but decided to settle in Massachusetts anyway, without legal rights. Virginia's only existing settlement at Jamestown was inhabited by non-Puritans, and the Pilgrims may have wanted to keep a distance. Since quarreling with their backers, the spiritual purpose of the voyage had come to override the commercial considerations. The 87 Pilgrims, plus 14 servants and workmen, and the 48-man crew of the hired Mayflower, who landed at Plymouth Harbor, faced a chilling prospect. It was December, and the fathomless forest they confronted must have looked like anything but a promised land. They had believed in the literal reenactment of biblical events. William Bradford, one of their leaders, was deeply disappointed when a search around the vicinity of Massachusetts Bay failed to turn up Mount Pisgah, the prospect from which Moses had first sighted the land of Canaan. Under the circumstances, they made an astonishing mental leap. They stepped outside their myth-clogged mental lives to grasp something essential about the real world, that the wilderness could become a land of milk and honey, that one was the raw material of the other, and that a land of milk and honey was a fair approximation of Eden. In fact, they might all be one and the same thing. This insight didn't dispose them to fear the wilderness any less, but it spawned the utilitarian hope that something could be done with it, that it could be conquered, vanquished, and ultimately redeemed by godly men. They immediately went to work building a settlement, their city on a hill. Before spring came, 44 of their number had died. Though the Puritans had exiled themselves spiritually and geographically from England, they still thought of themselves as English, carrying with them English laws and customs. Within a year of their fateful landing, they came to terms with the London financiers and received a charter that gave legal birth to Plymouth Plantation. The Puritan foothold in the New World was greatly fortified by the creation of the Massachusetts Bay Company in 1629. It began as a commercial venture, but almost immediately shifted its focus from trade to religion. A large number of its stockholders, Puritans disgusted with the libertine regimes of Charles I, sailed off to America. The company's organizational structure became the colonial government, with a governor at the top, and the General Court of Stockholders became the legislature. Now, they set about building real towns. Despite the cultishness of the enterprise, as well as the need for communal labor, a system of private property ownership prevailed from very near the start. The first towns, naturally enough, were modified versions of the late medieval English towns, though the supply of land was enormous by English standards. In England, farmers lived neatly clustered together in villages, with their fields located all around the outskirts. Typically, an early Massachusetts town was organized with individually owned home lots around a fenced common used to pen livestock. Townships were granted to whole congregations who crossed the ocean as a group, bringing with them highly localized customs and farming practices. Where a minority couldn't abide the way a town was run, they could resolve their problem by hiving out to some unsettled area, always in a group, and creating a way of life with which they were at ease. The founding families of a town formed a covenanted corporation that held title to all the land and then dealt out home lots based on family needs and social standing. The land was not paid for per se with money, but each signatory to the covenant was obliged to erect a house within 2 or 3 years, to pay taxes, and to help support a church. A family with many children got a larger lot. Bachelors got smaller ones. Men with desirable skills, such as blacksmiths, millers, and ministers, were attracted by offering double and triple allocations. The Puritans were not egalitarian. The idea of a social order based on hierarchy of position was natural to them. Wealthy or exalted persons got bigger allocations. Even so, the distribution of home lots in this early phase of settlement was most equitable by later standards. For in laying out the physical plan of their towns, they were also laying the foundation of an economic system that they hoped would be stable and enduring. The home lot in a Puritan village held the family's house and barn, kitchen gardens, and fruit trees. A family normally received 120 acres of land outside the village, often scattered around the township so that no one could consolidate his holdings on a single parcel. Much of the acreage was left in rough pasture and woodlot. Wheat and rye were grown in 1 or 2 common fields in which each family was given a strip proportionate in size with its home lot. Since tools were scarce, plowing was often a community project. But after plowing, each
Sample complete. Ready to continue?